My name's Janson. I'm with Nokia. And yeah, for perhaps the past 5 years or so, I've been pretty actively involved in what we now call quantum safe networks. So I want to start with just a real quick definition. As I was introduced as talking about quantum networks, just be careful there. Really what we're talking about are, as some like to say now, classic networks, communication networks, things that are working now, and protecting them against attack by a quantum computer. So, last year I gave a similar talk here with your colleague from ID Quantique, and, a lot of the discussion at the time was kind of dark, right? Because all these talks here at the Quantum World Congress tend to be looking at quantum computing, the evolution thereof, and the good side of it, sort of the quantum benefit, as some might say. And then I come on stage and I'm saying, but wait a minute, we have to worry about how we protect data flying around on the network, and therein lies the thing that we've been after for quite some time. So, I'm not going to go through a lot of this in rigorous detail. What I wanted to do this afternoon, is work with Simon, who's one of our partners with ID Quantique, and just give you a bit of an update as to where we're at, now in 2024 with respect to protecting networks against attack from a quantum computer. So, the concept here really is that it's no surprise to anyone here, I don't think. We are a highly digitalized society. It means that all our connectivity flies across traditional classical networks today. The encryption mechanisms, the protection mechanisms that have been used are vulnerable. I don't think I need to review that too much, but just remind you, in this crowd anyway, that there's a vulnerability there. And this is what gave rise to development of things like quantum key distribution, and gave rise to things like post-quantum cryptography, which we now have a set of standards to work with. So what I want to give you, I hope in the next few minutes, is just an update as to where Nokia are with respect to how we talk to our customers, be they a service provider, a government agency, a government network, or large enterprise, any of these types of network operators, and help them be aware of the threat that's posed and how to protect themselves. So there's a set of tools in the toolbox, is the way I like to think about this. If we start with here, symmetric cryptography, and go back to 2015 or so when NIST, I believe, initially gave a directive that said top secret information, because of this emerging threat, needs to be protected using symmetric cryptography. I like to think of what's going on here really on three determinants: keys, locks, and distribution. And fundamentally, when we say symmetric cryptography, what we mean is that the keys are distributed in a symmetric manner from some centralized source. And so algorithms like AES and so forth, these are viewed to be very rigorous tools for that protection. And then I can add to that a little bit of color with respect to pre-shared keys, right? I get a key in one form or another to two ends of a communication channel, and I'm assured that key is safe, generally based or historically based on classic physics. But there's the next tool in the toolbox, which is what Simon will give you more detail on, and that's quantum key distribution, right? So often what happens, I found, I've literally been flying around the world this year talking to people about this. Some who are not real close to this technology think, QKD equals quantum safe, or just symmetric cryptography equals quantum safe, or PQC equals quantum safe. And what we're trying to say is that it's not quite that simple. It's really a mix of these things, and it just sort of depends which piece of the network we're talking about and what the network operators' sort of evolution plans are, right? These networks tend not to be built on the basis of a piece of equipment that one buys and puts in place and then rips out and replaces immediately. There tend to be replacement cycles, and that gives rise to the need to have to use a lot of these different technologies over time. And things don't always scale so simply. As I'll get into more detail in a minute, but there's a strong advantage to using asymmetric cryptography in certain places of the network, and that's why these post-quantum ciphers were developed in the first place. So more on that in a minute, really. So this is kind of an overview of the tool chest that we have to work with, right? So we know we have this threat. We know that quantum computers can break these sometimes decades-old frameworks, so we got to do something about it. And the way to work forward here is really kind of based on this, just this idea that, again, think about keys, locks, and distribution. We have ultimately still at the heart of this thing, this idea of different engines, different encryption engines like AES we like to lean on, and kind of wrap around that different mechanisms that will allow us to move up the OSI stack, let's say, to provide protection. So without doing anything, this picture is just trying to give you an idea that there are a lot of risk points, a lot of vulnerabilities in the network, and we're trying to point these out to people that you might want to grab onto one of these and make sure that they are quantum safe and roll that into a plan over time. So then oftentimes people say, well, what's really the risk? How soon will we actually have, a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, and why should I really act now? I like this chart. This comes from Global Risk Institute, from a study that was published in 2023. I believe our colleagues at EvolutionQ had something to do with this. I don't know if you're in the room, but I call out that because I like to grab onto this oftentimes. So here it is. Think about this now. We're here in 2024 now, so in a sense, this is already a year in. So within 9 years, by 2033, if there is even a 17% chance that a cryptographically relevant quantum computer exists and is able to crack one of those circles in the prior chart I had out, that ought to at least make you think, 17%, if there's a 17% chance that something really bad is going to happen, I really ought to take action now, or at least have a plan in the next, say, year or two to put some protection measures in place. And so it's pulling one of those tools out of the chest and implementing that in a network and then monitoring it over time. So that ought to be pretty scary, right? By 2023, that's 9 years away from now. And okay, you could argue that if there is as much as a 30% chance the CRQC will exist, then there's the other 69% that it won't happen. Depends if you're a gambling person, but it certainly is compelling to take action, I believe. So, really it's kind of this idea of, do you have the ability, will you have the ability in the future to go back and correct something that you should have done now? And of course the answer is no, right? We don't have the Back to the Future car available. But I think it's pretty common speak now, walking around today at this event, that people understand the idea of harvest now, decrypt later. People kind of understand that even if it's longer than 10 years before CRQC is around, that there's still a vulnerability, a risk for very sensitive data. So take action today. So, back to my construct of keys, locks, and distribution. These are the three things to us that make up a quantum safe network. So, I found, again, depending on who you're talking to, who the audience is, and how exposed they've been to this, just a year, maybe 2 years ago, some would say AES 256 in a optical communication link, we're quantum safe. Of course, I think we know that's not good enough. The question is then, how is the key distributed from either end of the link? And then we would advise towards symmetric distribution structures. That's great. And then it's also a matter of how is that key actually generated, right? Is it generated based on classic physics, and is that good enough? Do we want more protection than that? Do we want to wrap in the protection that can be afforded to avoid man-in-the-middle attacks, right? So this other aspect of the key, its quality and its integrity, that kind of gives rise to the use of QKD in that top bar. So maybe here's kind of the punchline of where I wanted to bring you to in my comments. We had this introduction recently from NIST of these post-quantum ciphers, and as I'd said, some people who have just maybe a casual exposure to this stuff may hear, okay, there's new standards from NIST, so I guess I just buy an appliance and plug that in wherever I might be, and I'm done. Well, it's not really quite that simple, right? Because especially if you're a network operator with a lot of nodes, with a lot of spans, with a lot of applications. There's many instances of communication channels that are being encrypted at one level or another. So I mean, I draw your attention to this notion here of, again, the tools in the tool chest, but maybe most significantly, way over on the right here, this model of the OSI reference model. You know, where I come from, I'm thinking more of the physical and Ethernet layer, those bottom layers of that stack. And so these are, sometimes we'll call them just very highly engineered connections, right? They're nailed up, they're set up and more or less left there for a very long period of time. So it's ideally suited for a symmetric key distribution situation where, be it automated or be it even manual, we set up a link, we put the encryption in place and leave it going, and then that's pretty protected. We can rotate the keys on a regular basis, and we have nice, very strong protection. But up at the top layer, the application layer, what the gentleman from Accenture was showing you this morning, if you're in that session, you know, there you've got a lot of vulnerability, but there you've got the opposite of a very engineered connection. You have a very dynamic and an ephemeral connection, something that's very temporary. You know, you log into to some instance, and then you know, you want that connection to be encrypted, and then it's gone once your transaction's done. So that's really where we see PQC initially taking you know, having traction. Now, does that mean if I'm here in a conference, this conference, say in 5 years, that the post-quantum ciphers haven't bubbled down? They may have. There may be places where we use those ciphers at the lower layer. But for the time being, right now, today, what we tell people is, you know, you deploy symmetric ciphers at the bottom layers of the OSA stack, watch these PQC ciphers, and I mean watch them come into commercial products, which then can be part of your evolution plan, and those two will kind of merge down together. And Simon, I want to make sure I got plenty of time left for you, so just one or two last things. So this is kind of a blueprint, just to give you an idea, and maybe it's a good handoff point. I've kind of alluded to most of these things already. On the far left here, you know, here's kind of what we have tended to call our blueprint, just blueprint one, the idea that you have a communication channel between 2 points, and the key is generated, the red key up there is generated someplace from a you know, highly trusted source, and then manually distributed, right? Physically by, you know, two guys, armed guards with a smart card or something like that, if you will. Works, it's robust, it's secure, but it's not very scalable. The next idea is to actually have an automated mechanism, a centralized server that can generate that key in a very highly you know, random way and distribute it in a very secure way to both ends. But then we want to layer on top of that another level of protection, and that's where QKD comes in. And so that top blue bar on the far right-hand side, that's giving us yet another level of protection. So my point here on all of this really is that we want to build a protection that has multiple layers, and that's what forms, you know, what's commonly called defense in depth. So with that, you know, Simon, I want to hand it over to you, if I may.
Sure. I think 1, 2. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm wired. Very good. Is it left or right or both? Oh, it's both. Okay, good. All right. Well, Simon Patkovic, I've attended 2 out of 3 of these events over the past year, so very happy to be back. And thank you, Chris, for Nokia for inviting me to co-present here. ID Quantique's over 20 years, Geneva, Switzerland-based, over 20 years in pioneering of quantum communication. We do, just quickly, we do QKD, prepare and measure DVQKD, which is telecom industry grade now and in production at many sites. So it's the most mature part, in addition to some quantum sensing technologies, the most mature part of the quantum sort of industry and technology overall. We do quantum random number generators, which have found its place already in multiple applications, including telecom network appliances and phones, such as Samsung Quantum Phone. And we expect this to proliferate over the coming years with the support of standardization across all of the use cases where TRNG will slowly get phased out. And we also do single photon detectors, which are used in research, but also used in quantum computing. So there's that link over there. So just on my background, I spent about 20 years in mobile security, classified security, also working with governments on projects such as Merkel phone in Germany, 2012-13, if anybody remembers the infamous Angela Merkel case, where eventually BlackBerry supplied classified solution to German government, and also had luck or a lack of luck to spend many years working on law enforcement related bulk monitoring and surveillance type of issues, dealing with national security agencies, intelligence agencies in many countries, mostly around Asia, some Middle East, and some in Europe, around how different technologies enable or disable law enforcement agencies to do their jobs. And so I think UKD is going to make their job much harder. So unfortunately, but fortunately for us, it's also going to give us strategic ability to preserve our secrets in the geopolitical race, quantum race. And maybe before I just give you a couple of ideas here around how IDQ works on this, just to mention, I spent a couple of years with ICERA in Canada working on PQC toolkit and a cryptographic agility suite called ICERA Advance, which is a toolkit that helps with crypto inventory, which is the first step in anybody's journey to migration. So I had that luck to work with large companies, banks, and governments, and also manufacturers of long-lived devices on issues around PQC and cryptographic agility. But in a nutshell, my experience boils down to this. Every organization, literally has to go through this cycle of identifying threats to their business. Cryptography now becomes an unknown, a threat to cryptography, when it's going to manifest, how, where your libraries are, how you're going to migrate, and you have to then do something about it. You have to do something about that risk. You have to create a plan. And I worked with companies, major banks, 4 years ago. They already had a committee of 17, 18 people working on the migration plan and strategy for quantum safe. And then you have cases where even today, 2024, the year of influx and PQC standards, you have companies that have absolutely no idea what they're going to do. So they're going to try to ride a kind of sit and wait wave and hope that the vendors that supply systems to them is going to do majority of work for them. But that's fine if you have managed kind of services and networks and apps. But if you have in-house built and operated and on-prem kind of systems, that's just not going to go well. And this is your cryptographic agility cycle, steps that all of us, no matter which company we work for, will have to go through. It's well understood and known. The first part's relatively easy, even though the tooling still is lacking in that space. Analyze reports, sort of audit which part of my infrastructure is upgraded, which is not upgraded, and sort of keep your vendors honest. If a vendor say, well, we want to upgrade our apps or firewalls and a certain release to be, PQC, how do you know they have done so, right? So you need tooling to be able to track all of that. And then the hardest part is to remediate and sort of create a set of APIs so that the apps, third-party apps that have hard-coded crypto can lean on some sort of a policy server and catch the policy du jour on the fly, really, instead of using embedded cryptographic algorithms. This was built a couple of years ago. The prediction of how different industries will migrate to quantum safe. This includes both QKD and PQC. I kind of dare to put something called quantum panic, which will happen some point in time when there's sufficient evidence that there is a possibility, probably of a state actor running a relevant quantum computing and be able to execute Shor's algorithm. We'll probably find out a couple of years too late about it. Hence, I named that event Quantum Panic, which will probably be the second wave of migration of different industries. But the topic we're discussing here today is a network infrastructure and these underlying core enabling pieces for these data center clusters and long-haul connectivity to function. All of this piece will need its own timeline to be migrated. Couple of things I've learned recently in some of the events that I've attended. Some were behind closed doors, so Chatham House rules, I cannot name anybody, but there is a strong consensus in the namely financial industry that 2035 is not a realistic goal for quantum safe migration. So people wonder how come, why, but that's 11 years from now. Well, if an expert for cryptography from a large bank tells you he does not think he will be able to get bank to be quantum safe across the board in 11 years, he probably knows what he's talking about. So for them, what the issue is like, okay, well, we have to do it in some order, right? We have to prioritize, right? Where is the largest surface attack, the most critical? Of course, they will do it that way, but still, they consider that a lot of risk. And this is why, over the past few years, from ID Quantique side, we work with those large financials. They've been experimenting with QKD and how it scales and how it works with the optical network and IP networks, including Nokia. So we've done a couple of very, very large POCs with Nokia in the past, both in Asia and in Europe. And what the consensus is that, and you've heard that maybe yesterday if you attended one of these sessions from Marco Pistoia, is that they're going to be employing now officially the dual strategy, meaning that they will be in parallel, they will be deploying both, upgrading classical algorithms to PQC, and at the same time, they will be rolling out QKD. And the reason for that is it's just a risk management technique from their end, and they want to have that defense in depth and sort of a layered approach to security. And so another topic that's kind of, I think Chris touched on, that I found a lot of feedback on by large companies, in particular those that run their own optical networks and that they have their own sort of optical layer, is that this sort of a cyber hygiene, if I may call it that way. So how do you manage, like what they found, there's a lot of scary anecdotes of manual keying, sort of manual management of keys, rolling the keys, layer 1 and 2 every 6 months. Who's the guy who's got the keys? Oh, where is the USB stick? Oh, it got lost. Or who's the last who saw the USB stick with the, it's really scary. And so what's happening with that kind of story and that domain is that it's just mandatory automation there, right? And Nokia's got a wonderful solution that is just really mandatory if you think about it. You've got to automate this. And there are systems specifically designed to automate. If you deploy QKD with quantum key management system, that's another way to automate it, obviously, because at this point in time, the keys from the layer 1, 2, or 3 network equipment is requested over ETSI 014 protocol to QKD. And QKD supplies the key, and the network encryption device doesn't do key exchange at that point, simply says, give me the key, and then uses the key to the symmetric encryption. So that's the change we've seen in the industry, and that's called out-of-band key exchange. And just the notion that it's out-of-band, depending on the use case, provides additional security, because tapping in-band key exchange allows you to tap both key exchange and the payload. Whether you're able to break it or not is another story. Here you have different channels, and you need to correlate, which optical network the payload's going through, which optical network the actual key exchange is going through. That is a nightmare for somebody trying to tap into the traffic. Plus, on top, as you know, QKD the properties of QKD do not allow any form of tapping or information collection. So dual strategy is really for me, this is the year of influx for a lot of these technologies, for PQC, QKD as well, and sort of the dual strategy is the theme, and I think most of the financial industry, and we see now in telecom space, are embracing it. This is also worth mentioning. So Monetary Authority of Singapore released an advisory to financial institutions in Singapore earlier this year, urging them to look at quantum safe and very specifically telling them to look at both PQC and QKD. So it's, we see some of these authorities acting towards that. I don't know if anybody is familiar with QEDC, the US Association, Quantum Association. So they did an event in early this year, I think it was April, and it was a closed-door event in New York with DIFI and a lot of federal agencies and financial players. And there is a report out of that session, which is very much worth a look. So it's if you have access to QEDC website, there is a report, financial report, that some of the topics I mentioned here are from that particular event. But monetary authority, so we expect more of these coming in the future. We're doing a very large project in Singapore with Singtel, deploying a network that's going to allow customers to kind of leverage this hybridized approach, right? So today you can have a mix of any kind of, which Chris mentioned, any kind of these systems running together. Even as in a single solution, you may have hybridization of classical and PQC, for instance, or you can have QKD on another layer, but going into the future, you're going to really be looking at especially long distance QKD and PQC hybridization. So just to show you that the QKD is really telecom grade at this point. Most people still think it's research because there's confusion. People say QKD, and then there's many kinds of QKD. So you can buy QKD that's research QKD and tangle-based QKD that needs a truck to deliver the system, and it works a couple of miles. So it's a research system. It's a really fantastic technology, but it's not at the highest level of TRL. And then you have prepare and measure, which is 1U standard high SLA rack mountable unit that's just meant to be deployed and used. And these are the standards that we use. And so when you go from KX, which stands for Clarion KX, which is Quantum Key Management System, which is a software running across QKD network. This is the thing that makes intelligent large network with many QKD devices possible. And the consumer is, for instance, in this example, any of the Nokia encryptors is a consumer. So Nokia encryptor will simply set a request for a key over the Nokia SNMP protocol to Clarion KX. This would come at two different parts of the network, and then Clarion KX will orchestrate in between QKD boxes how that key will be cut and made available to the two ends of the network. And that can happen on any OSI layer, right? And we really have extensive support for a lot of devices and most of the industry, in fact. And then east-west, so this is north. East-west, you need to manage that system, so you need to plug into the software-defined networks and other interfaces. And then you have KMS to KMS, meaning that if two companies or two telecoms are running on two different key management systems, how then VPNs that are on both sides can exchange keys. So that's KMS to KMS interface, that's 020. It's still a draft, it's not a mature. And then the south, meaning we have opened recently our Quantum KMS to other QKDs, meaning that if you use IDQ's Quantum KMS, you don't have to buy QKD devices from us. It's a multi-vendor, so you can go to the provider of your choice and buy QKD devices. This is just to help the industry mature. You cannot really have a mature industry so everybody's tying everybody into their proprietary stacks. So this is just opening it up for a fair game. This is just an example from Singapore. So it's a ring, and then customer sites are added to the ring as hub and spoke. So there's going to be many there. And then keys, just as in the previous slide, that's the way it routes. And this is vertically how this looks like. You have QKD. You can also extend, Quantum KMS can extend that out-of-band key beyond QKD. So if you do not have good fiber optical network, then it's using algorithmic security to get to an appliance, QRNG appliance at the edge, still doing it out of band. So it's not tied to purely deploying QKD. You can go across the sea and across thousands of kilometers. An encryptor, and then in this example, quantum safe platform as a service, meaning that telco can use Nokia equipment, can use IDQ equipment, and secure bandwidth, say, between 2 data centers for the end customer. So the service is quantum safe bandwidth. I need 100 gig of connectivity between racks and data centers, and I want them to be quantum safe from the bottom up, and this is pretty much what we enable telco partners to do. So it's pretty much new concept in the field, but it's working well. And then depending on the size of the customer, their cybersecurity policy and so on. Some customers prefer key as a service rather than bandwidth as a service. They want to manage their own encryption and so on. So I don't have more time. I think we ran out of time. So do we want to open it up for questions, Chris? No time for questions?
Sorry.
Okay. Thank you then for your time. Appreciate it.